Welcome to video number 10 in our professional development series focused on online learning and teaching, specifically how to engineer student-to-student online engagement. In this video, we look at principle number 4, learning design. We know that there are 4 principles that can guide our pedagogy to help engineer that student-to-student engagement. Learning design we can define as that engineering student engagement amongst the teacher, the student, with the content and the digital tool that leverages both individual and collective knowledge. In one of the earlier videos, I talked about the theory of TPACK, pedagogical, technological, content knowledge. Now, if we want learner-centered design processes, we understand that pedagogy is the focus. Our pedagogy directs our intent for learning. We choose the particular technology to leverage opportunity with the content knowledge. So pedagogy is important in this process of understanding learning design. Learning-centered design encourages the designer to make the learner, rather than the content, the focus of the course design processes, and importantly, prioritizes learner interaction, that student-to-student engagement, instead of a whole lot of content presented in synchronous or asynchronous ways. So it builds in the use of those tools for interactivity, so leveraging up the content. Now let's just have a look at the relationship between asynchronous tools and spaces and synchronous, because there is a difference between why and when you would use those particular tools. So let's start with the asynchronous space, and I call that the foundation of online learning. So your OneNote or your learning management system houses the content. So do you provide all the content first, or do you help students with a particular pathway through that content? Do you release content week after week after week? Do you have activities such as the discussion forum that then give opportunity for collaboration around that content in that anytime space, in those asynchronous spaces? So which tools you choose will have an impact on how that content is engaged with. Then you bring in the synchronous tools. So when would you choose in that learning pathway when to do a small group activity? When would you have a whole class session? When would you have an opt-in session or a check-in session? So we think about this in the way that the asynchronous provides a foundation for the synchronous engagement when you're online. When you could design using a game-based approach where students have to look through some content, work through some content and use a quiz to pass through the activities. Or you can often use discussion forums and collaborative spaces as well, of course. So these are just ideas being presented. You could have self-check-ins and peer check-ins. So these are opportunities where students are making more choices and they have more flexibility. So the relationship between the asynchronous and synchronous tools does matter, with the idea that asynchronous does become the platform or the foundation or the first place that a student will go to for that online activity. Now, when we look at learning design, we'll draw on TPACK, that theory. So we know that students come with prior knowledge. We know that we'll be pretty much presenting content first up in a learning sequence, or do we? What tool do we use to work with that content? What tool are we asking the students to engage with matters because of the pedagogical intent, the learning intent. If we do a task following that, what tool are we using? Is it going to be individual work? Is it going to be shared work? And so on. So the tool does matter, but it matters because of the choice and the flexibility and how we actually want the learning pathway to flow. We know that transactional distance, that distance of misunderstanding matters, and it's affected by dialogue, course structure, and learner autonomy. Students may feel more or less of that misunderstanding or that transactional distance in their online course or activity, depending on how those three play out. So structure and dialogue have an inverse relationship. Too much structure can limit dialogue, which then affects learner autonomy. When effective course design is applied, dialogue needs to be considered part of the online activities, either synchronously or asynchronously, so students can actually exercise some of their autonomy. Also thinking about structure, providing, say, for example, all the material up front, so students have greater choice in allocating their time or their movement through the task, does increase learner autonomy. We also know that the community of inquiry model does matter when we're designing online learning activities. Now, we know we have to design for cognitive presence, our own teaching presence, and social presence. But if we're following an inquiry process, we have to choose tools that will trigger an event, digital tools that will help with exploration, digital tools that will help with the integration of knowledge and the resolution. So if we're applying an inquiry process, we actually think quite critically about which tools we're using at which point in time in that learning pathway. So we know that asynchronous provides the context for synchronous, that opt-in session. Online is more about engineering student engagement than providing a whole lot of content. Directing students on how to engage is critical in the learning process, and chunking smaller bite-sized bits of content with task activity enabling greater choice in that learning pathway is important. Design for fully online is different to blended. So let's think about this blended classroom, this relationship of the online to a mainstream classroom base. So in blended, the use of classroom currently, you could say, provides a space for collaboration, with online the content management space, mainly holding the content. However, we need students to be active in the online space. We can't have it just as a content management system. Blended components of online look like tools for brainstorming, forum discussions, so that exploration of content. So students have a place and a space for contribution beyond the classroom. A key idea in blended is the link of the asynchronous work that you do in the online into the classroom work. So you're exploring, analysing, making contributions while you're in the classroom, modelling and supporting that engagement on how to do that in the classroom. So the relationship of the two is very important. That's why it's called blended learning. The importance is that the online comes into the classroom. So whatever happens in that space has relevance and importance and actually is done in the classroom. So I just wanted to talk lastly about a few myths about learning design. The first myth is that 1 hour online you can do 1 hour in the classroom. So the same, which isn't correct. 1 hour online is totally different to 1 hour in the classroom. Online, as we've explored, is a completely different space to classroom learning. The rigour of a classroom discussion can be achieved online in a forum or a real-time chat. Now, when students are first experiencing these online spaces, they're not going to be able to have the depth of discussion that you physically create in a classroom. Experience of online discussions in synchronous or asynchronous takes time and opportunity. So the more that they engage in these ways and are taught on how to engage in these ways, the more that they feel more comfortable and the more deeper that dialogue will become. Students don't need the physical routine of a classroom. Well, at this point in time when our classrooms are the main spaces for where learning happens, and we have conformed them to thinking that this is the main space, the physical routine of getting up and moving on is a part of students' normal, natural way of learning. So to be able to disrupt that is a different way of presenting and working in that fully online space. So a blended mode is still orientated to that physical movement when you're when you're moving around the classroom or you're moving from class to class. Students are good at learning online because they are tech savvy, and we know this has always been a myth that's around, but we know that students who are working in those social mediated spaces, they're not using the digital technology as a cognitive tool, as a tool to leverage learning opportunities. That's why we need to teach them how to do that. So this is the last video in this series. No, sorry, not the series, the set. In the next set of 5 videos, we actually apply these principles and that core model of cognitive, emotional, and behavioural engagement to curriculum examples so that you can see what it looks like in practice. Thank you.